What's up guys, welcome to the breakdown of the R35. Alright, let's dive straight in. We'll start with the engine, which is probably one of the most common questions that I get asked. Why did I put an RB in this car when it comes out with a VR38? From factory, to be honest, if you saw this car when I first picked it up, you understand that it was going to be a massive task to get this thing back up and running. It was literally a bare chassis, no running gear, no panels even. So starting out with that, I thought, let's focus on developing the chassis and trying to get it to actually drift. We didn't even know if it was going to be a good drift car or not. So I thought sticking with an engine that we know inside out was definitely the wise decision at that time. And what this car's turned into, I back that decision. I love how this car performs and handles now. And I think it was a wise choice, and it sounds bloody awesome too. So the engine that we run in this car is an RB30. It's a cast block out of an old R31 Skyline. Me and Richard from Engine Specialties have worked together for a long time. We got a PPM stroker kit out of Australia. That makes it a 3.4 litre bottom end, so all of that stroke is in the crank and the rods. We tried to keep the bore cylinder size as small as possible, so this is 86.5mm, which is basically your typical aftermarket piston size, just to try to keep the wall thickness as thick as possible on the sleeves, because if you go too thin, you go into water galleries and you start cracking cylinders and things like that. Very common problem with RBs, so trying to keep that as thick as possible. This motor runs the Ross Performance dry sump, trigger kit and everything. That keeps it, if you guys are aware with RBs, they get a lot of trigger issues, so that kit does an amazing job to eliminate all of that. It's got a sensor on the crank and on the cam trigger, so they work together, report back to the computer, give a nice stable reading for your timing. So on this motor we also went for the Rips Racing billet main cap, which basically eliminates the factory cradle out of it. You put some big billet main caps in that hold in the crank, and then a big flex plate that ties in the block to the center of the crank. So moving up top, this head has had a lot of work done to it. Richard spent a lot of time porting, flow testing, doing oversized valves, cams, shimless buckets, just trying to make this flow as much air as possible out to the GDX 3584 RS, which has been a perfect combination for this motor. Super efficient, and it's producing 19 pounds of boost, which is extremely low for a race engine. Helps keep all the temperatures down, and if you don't need to push that boost, then it's better to try to run it on minimal boost as possible. So definitely happy with all that setup. That is all controlled with two Turbo Smart wastegates, which are shooting out to the sky. That was a bit of an experimental thing as well. Instead of doing the big 60mm wastegate, I decided to do two 45s, come out of each side of the collector. So Tim from Triple T made a 6-into-1 exhaust manifold with a collector that's got two wastegate ports that come out of each side of it to try control the boost as much as possible. The only thing I want to change with that is going to a heavier spring in the wastegates rather than relying on a solenoid actuator to hold the gate shut to get to our 19 pounds of boost. I'd rather just run a 19-pound spring. I'd done it with the R34 and it made quite a difference on when the car comes on boost. It kind of snaps on boost rather than the wastegate solenoid trying to hold the wastegate shut longer when the spring's trying to basically let the wastegate open. So that's one thing I'll change. Need to go back on the dyno and tune after that, so we'll get around to that once we can get out of here again. So for the fuel system, we've got a aftermarket fuel rail with ID 2000cc injectors, all E85 compatible, dash 8 lines from the tank all the way down, Teflon lined hose, 2 in from either end, and then 1 back to the fuel reg and back to the tank. If you've ever dealt with the 85, you'll know it's an extremely temperamental fuel and you need to be on top of your maintenance with it all the time. These come with little injector baskets which sit in the top of the injectors, which we change regularly. Basically every time I drive the car, I'll pull all the injectors out, swap all the baskets out, clean them out, clean the filters in the fuel tank, and make sure there's nothing that's restricting the flow of the fuel, because it's a very easy way to blow your engine if you have the E85 clogging up your injectors. So make sure you stay on top of that. That's about all for the engine. Electric power steering, that's probably one thing that I want to upgrade slightly. That's an MR2 pump. That's probably not specifically designed for a car to be this heavy. This car is 1502 kilos with me in it and a full tank of gas, so it's kind of pushing its limit on that. So I want to go to an aftermarket unit for that. So yeah, well, that's one thing I want to change. Right, so moving down to the rear end, this houses the fuel system and radiator setup. Tim from Triple T's done an amazing job at designing all of this back window. Nice curved Lexan back windows, and then we've got this little duct here to help scoop the air in. So when you design this, it's basically try to create a low pressure zone through here to try to draw the air down and into the radiator, which seems to work extremely well. Then the radiator's got 2 fans in behind that draw the air through. Then if you come under here, you can see there's a aluminium plate which deflects the air off and stops the hot air off the radiator heating up the fuel tank. And then the boot has some vents and everything in it to allow the air out. It can also get out down under there and drawn out the back. Also just the volume of water that you can achieve by having it mounted in the back. There's big dash 20 lines that run from here down to an electric water pump and then all the way to the front of the motor. So just the volume of water that they hold alone is a big thing for keeping this car nice and cool. This basically doesn't see temperatures over 92 degrees, so it's very well controlled, especially with the water spray unit. If it gets too hot, I can manually switch that pump on and it'll spray a mist of water onto the radiator and cool it back down very quickly. The fuel system is a radium fuel tank all in one, so it's got all the pumps and everything built in. Fuel safe tank, so this is a aluminium tank with a bladder system inside it, so even if you rupture the side of the tank or something, then your fuel should still stay nice and safe inside. So yeah, nice and tidy setup. As you can see, these two lines here go to 2 fuel filters, which we clean regularly. Then it gets pumped to each side of the fuel rail, then the return from the regulator comes back to this one here, straight back into the tank, nice and clean, super easy. And then all your wiring comes out of here as well, so everything is nice and contained and super clean and tidy. And we've got a Geordie coal as well. Right, so that's the rear end. Let's take a look inside the car. You'll see OMP seats, harnesses. These are the narrow harnesses to suit your Hans device, which we run for competition. OMP wheel, Woodward steering column, 5-speed sequential gearbox, so all the gears are back, that's up gears, and down gears you go forward. On the left of that we've got the reverse engagement, so that puts it into reverse, and then on the right here we've got one of the ASD handbrakes, so nice and simple. We've got the Link Dash, which is actually the old style. We've got the new one, Dash 2 Pro, to install over the next couple of weeks. So this allows me to talk to my passenger as well as my crew. So I hit this button down here and I can talk to my crew, so my spotter, my mechanic, and anyone in the pits with a radio. So I'll just move over this side so you can see it a little bit better, but that is the dry sump tank. That holds about 16 litres of oil in the system. Really good for keeping oil consistency and temperatures well within control. Also that dry sump system makes all the difference on an RB motor. It stops all the breathing. Nice even oil flow, you never run out of oil on those big banked or long one direction corners. The sump never runs out of oil, so definitely a good addition to have. A little bit to the right of that you'll see the Link G4 Thunder. That's one of the top of the line computers that Link produce. Those guys have been supporters for a long time, love having them on board. New Zealand made computer, designed and developed in Christchurch, New Zealand, so definitely love working with those guys. So going into suspension, you'll notice this has a big front sway bar. I like the car to feel nice and stable in the front. It also helps support when you get on throttle. It helps keep the car nice and balanced and transfer the weight to the rear of the car, which provides more grip. A lot of people don't understand that a lot of your rear grip comes from how the front of the car is set up. So suspension wise, we run the Oz Racing coilovers. In the front I've got an 18 kilo spring, which is pretty heavy. I still want to play around a bit with that and try to fine tune a little bit more and see if I can get the front feeling a little bit better. Then we just work on the factory adjustment with the rebound and bump dampener in the shock itself. Then for steering, so TDP got in touch with me when they saw I was building this car and said, hey, we're developing a kit for an R35, would you be interested in running it? And I said, hell yeah. I pretty much had no plan on what I was going to do for steering, as there's not many companies in the world that produce big angle kits for an R35. So with this kit we adapted the 370Z front disc and a Brembo caliper, just trying to keep it nice and simple, lightweight, and to fit an 18-inch wheel with the factory brakes is near impossible. So yeah, we went with that. Moving down to the back, we'll stop at the gearbox. This is the 5-speed sequential TTI. Something that's becoming very common in drift cars is sequential gearboxes, especially turbo cars, being the fact that we need to get off the line as quickly as possible. It gives us a couple extra gears and you can just pull straight through them and get up to speed, keeping the car in boost. Another very common thing is the Winters quick change diff, the drive shaft shop axles for strength and reliability. Also, you just need to undo this plate, whip it off, 2 gears in behind there, and you can change your diff ratio in literally 2 minutes. So very popular. From there, we've got aftermarket Dodson Performance arms. They are fully adjustable camber and toe to a factory knuckle. And then for brakes, we've got a slightly smaller disc than factory, and then machined down the hub to allow the factory caliper to still work with an 18-inch wheel. So decent sized brakes on the rear, single caliper because we don't use that much foot brake on the rear, so basically the rear caliper is really just for the handbrake. There's about 10% from the pedal that comes to the rear, so there was no need trying to come up with some way of making a second caliper work on the factory knuckle. Alright, for tyres we run the Zestino Semi-Slick Grigio 7Rs, 265 40s all round. That extra sidewall allows the tyre to work a little bit more. As it rolls over, it gives it a little bit more side bite, a little bit more drive and grip out of the tyre. For rims, we run the Broda D2X for competitions because the wheels take a hell of a beating throughout the weekend, and I don't want to wreck my good wheels for that. Sometimes you do need to run some nice wheels for both show and competition, so we do have a set of these. But because I don't want them to end up like this, that's why we run those other wheels for competition. So yeah, this motor is producing 611 kilowatts on 19 pounds of boost, which is really low boost for a race engine. But it does the job, and that's really all the power that we've been looking for. That's 820 horsepower at the wheels, and it definitely does the job. So when it comes to power to grip ratio, you've really got to find the balance and make it not overpower the tyre, because we're restricted to a 265 tyre here in New Zealand, so putting any more power into this wouldn't necessarily give you any advantage. So it's all about finding that power to weight to grip ratio and getting that perfect, rather than just throwing all this horsepower at the car and expecting it to go faster. Sorry to butt in, guys, but I was just wrapping up this video and I thought, hey, I've still got a box of parts. This is actually the reason as to why I built the 3.4 litre motor. This was my 3 litre motor that I ended up destroying at Summer Bash in 2017, I think it was. So it actually tore the block apart, ripped basically the back of the motor off. Well, we're pretty certain that the crank had something to do with this motor letting go. It's a very common issue for the crank to snap, and then it can still actually drive but basically destroys the rest of the motor. So as you can see, a lot of major damage, cracked the bell housing, shattered pistons and rods and release bearing, parts of the block and crank and cradle assembly, and the clutch was destroyed. So a lot of damage, and didn't want to go back down that road, so this is when we built the 3.4 motor. So that's all for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed the breakdown of the R35. If you did, give it a thumbs up on the video, subscribe, share it around if you can, and hopefully once we're out of isolation we can get out and do this for a couple of other people's cars and cover some things that you guys want to see. In the next episode we're going to cover the R34, do a breakdown on that, but for now I'll leave you with some on-track footage of this thing in action.